group did a good job of sort of starting at a project level, moving up to a city level. I like the progression because it leads well into sort of an industry level, which is where a lot of my research and experience has taken place, both at CannonDesign, but as well during after hours and especially during COVID when there was nothing else to do. I was doing a lot of research and writing, and was fortunate enough to publish The Circular Economy for Dummies, which was pretty fascinating because it wasn't focused on the built environment. I think there's one chapter that focuses on the built environment, but a lot of value came from this experience because I got to study how the circular economy performs within different industries like fashion, technology, food, even breweries and restaurants. And you start to see familiar patterns because really it's all resource management no matter what industry you're working in. So I was able to pull quite a few examples and resource management strategies from other industries and start to figure out how exactly they can come and play in the built environment. And it really all stemmed from this issue is that when it comes to resource management in the built environment, we don't do a very good job of it, let's say. There's some key issues that I've identified over the past few years that they seem really simple, and it's best to keep it simple, I've noticed. Simply enough, the cost of building materials is growing. The availability of new materials is decreasing. They're becoming harder to find, and it's delaying our construction schedules quite a bit. And the infrastructure for building material reuse on an industry scale really is non-existent at this point. There's a few reuse specialists sort of sprinkled around the US, but at an industry level, it's not really very cohesive. I interviewed 24 of my LinkedIn contacts who are in the architecture industry, not specifically sustainability, and then another 24 sustainable design leaders. And the question I asked them was, is supply chain issues affecting either the schedule or the availability of materials, as well as their cost? And the amazing sort of takeaway was the further away you get from being a sustainable design leader, the more impact supply chain is having on your role. And I think I see that as a good and bad thing. The bad part is that the sustainable design leaders who focus exclusively on sustainability aren't the ones who are getting directly impacted by supply chain shortages. The good thing is that we've now identified another opportunity for sustainable design leaders to actually help our project managers and get more involved in their process, because for them, they're really focused on the building. They know that there's a massive supply chain taking place behind the scenes, but for them and us as well, this global supply chain really seems out of our hand. And because it's out of our hand, we don't really know who to point to when understanding that the amount of construction and demolition waste that stems from this global supply chain is becoming amazingly ridiculous, to be honest. It's anticipated globally that we'll be producing 2.2 billion tons of construction and demolition waste by the year 2025, and that's global. That's a bit of an arbitrary number, so I did some math, and it's the same weight in material as 2,400 Golden Gate bridges, the same weight as 20,000 aircraft carriers, and the same weight as 14.5 million blue whales, and that many don't even exist on the planet. So the takeaway is that the supply chain issues aren't going away. And so I think more of us need to sort of flip the script and begin focusing more on how can we actually impact this global supply chain, but in a different way than we typically have in the past. Typically, we've had two options when it comes to materials. That's you can either throw it away or you can find opportunities to recycle it. But I think that there's sort of a way to do even better than that. And that's not by making sustainability better, because clearly with the progression of waste creation that we're seeing, neither of these are really offering a solution. So we have to accept that neither of these have worked. The solution really stems from us going from a sustainable approach to a regenerative approach. And by that, I mean, we're shifting from a recycling approach to a reuse approach, something that addresses the need for waste elimination, keeping materials in circulation within an industry-specific supply chain. That's key. And then through that, we're eliminating our demand, or at least greatly reducing our demand for raw materials. And by association, we're allowing the natural world to bounce back. And that's regeneration by definition. So we wouldn't be here talking at all if it was that simple. Okay, we'll just not recycle, we'll just reuse. It's obviously very, very challenging. So through the research that I've been doing and hundreds of interviews, I've sort of identified what I think the top 5 challenges for the architecture and construction industry are right now. And this is at a project level. The first one I really think is direction. Project teams are very used to the direction and phases that we work within, going from pre-design through SDs, DDs, CDs, CA. We're used to that. We know how it works. We know what needs to take place when. We know when to go left. We know when to go right. But there's not really a map that's been developed on how do we go through these same phases, but incorporate reuse as a key priority. That's not something that exists. So that's really the first limiting factor, I think, that's sort of scaring people away a bit from incorporating this into their projects. That makes them a bit hesitant. The second one is really coordination. And by no means do you need to go grab your bathing suit and those plugs. It's just sort of suggesting that we're all multiple stakeholders going through this process together. We're in different positions, we have different responsibilities, but really we're all going through the same exact routine. So understanding who needs to be doing what and when, who needs to be going left, who needs to be going right. It's no longer just a problem of, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but are others doing what they're supposed to be doing? We have limited control over what others are doing within a project, whether it's a contractor or an architect, even a building owner. So making sure that everyone on the team is coordinating for the same outcomes is another limiting factor. I've had, ever since sort of going on my tour of preaching reuse, I've had dozens and dozens of contractors sending me emails with pictures and material specifications saying, hey, can you find a new purpose for this material? We have loads of it. And I'll find a few teams who are wanting to incorporate reuse, but they're unable to because the specifications weren't written originally at the beginning of the project to allow for previously used materials. So even though the initiative is there and the interest is there, it wasn't able to take place. So this is another sort of limiting factor. Knowing what materials are where, when they'll become available, how they'll get from point A to point B, who has ownership, who has liability, when will this be shipped, and how does this stay attached to a shifting project schedule? Automating all of these variables is 100% realistic, but the infrastructure hasn't been developed yet. You can see this, again, going back to the Circular Economy for Dummies book, you can see this in a lot of different industries, but not yet within the architecture industry. And the last one being, how do we make sure and how do we confirm that the materials that we are reusing still have the same qualities that they had when they were originally sold? Who holds the liability if a material is sold and the new owner only gets about 1/10 of the life out of it that they were promised? We see, certified pre-owned used within the car industry and other industries. So something similar and parallel to this will need to be developed for materials that are being reused within the architecture industry. And so it gets a little daunting for me at times because I'm sort of searching for what the problems are with hopes to come up with a solution. And I realize that we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, but I'm trying not to get discouraged by also just sort of focusing on the solutions that we have available and things that we can consider. On project levels, for all of the project managers, there are really a few key strategies that I've sort of distilled down that if you can find a way to make one, if not all of them, part of your project, you're going to have some level of success. And I'm happy to send this list. I'm not going to be reading through it, but it really all focuses on, are we selecting the right materials? And this goes back to what Mabo was saying about designing for disassembly. Are we even specifying materials that at the end of a building's useful life will actually have the potential to be reused? If not, that's not a material we should be accepting anymore. Do we have sort of a catchment at the end of projects to recover resources? Are we specifying materials because they have a low embodied carbon content, or are we specifying them because they're durable and can be used for centuries into the future? Yes, centuries into the future. Is there a sharing platform? We heard this earlier, that identifying what materials are where is really challenging. So can we develop sharing platforms that lets project teams get connected to know what materials are available? And then product as a service, this is really reconsidering ownership versus leasing. So just a few strategies I wanted to note. But again, at a high level, doing more research annually as of 2018, the EPA has listed that we go through or produce about 600 million plus tons of construction and demolition waste, which just is a portion of the 2.2 billion globally that we'll be producing worldwide. I wasn't able to find a circularity ratio or percentage for the US, but globally, the global economy is at about 8.6% circular, and that's as of 2021. I'm guessing the US is less than half that. So 8.6 is sort of a best case scenario. Taking that into account, though, we're still left with 548 million plus tons of construction and demolition waste. This is not material that was recycled, this is waste. So this leads a lot of opportunities for us to find new uses. And it's hard for project teams to go through all this. So sort of the idea behind the Circular Economy Studio was, we'll take charge of the design coordination, including specifications, to make sure reuse can happen. We'll coordinate the scheduling, the shipping, the storage if needed, as well as the education on both sides, so that we can let designers and architects and contractors do what they do best, which is create, not worry about reuse, but have a team member or support agent who's helping them actually make their life easier while they're going through this reuse effort. And so there are different reuse opportunities. I want to leave enough time for questions, so I'll speed up a little bit, but I'm finding a lot of donation-based, where teams are saying, we're not going to try and resell this, we're just going to donate it. Some are willing to resell it, which I think will become more popular over time. But then intracycling for firms that have multiple projects taking place at any point in time, making sure that the materials from one project that are finishing up can actually be funneled to another project of theirs. So I developed early on this tool called Market Zero, which is an asset tracker as well as a reuse marketplace. And sort of as time progressed, I realized that this isn't really enough to support reuse. So instead of this being a publicly available tool at this point in time, it's actually a tool that our team uses internally. It's not something that is available just because there is so much coordination beyond identifying what materials are available that needs to take place for this to even be realistic. So once it does become publicly available, it'll be organized into different categories, whether it's a site material, facades such as glazing, it can be structures, interiors, systems, just sort of categorizing them so it makes more sense when we're getting into reuse opportunities. And talking about clients about this, it's been really successful because for the first time ever, when you're using this idea of material reuse as an outcome, for the first time ever, we're able to tell clients that you're actually able to get a return on your investment. The original capital investment that you put into this building, these materials still have value. So we're actually able to help you recapture a portion of that investment. So again, going back to designing for disassembly, if this is a new reality for project owners, they will now be incentivized to only have materials in their buildings that can, down the road, be re-enter the marketplace for a resale opportunity. So this is really going to help shift the way that building owners, demand what their buildings look like and what their lives look like. But it also gives architects and designers a great opportunity to help owners take ownership of those lifespans, help them map out what materials will be available for resale, when they should anticipate having renovations take place. Really, this whole management of a life cycle is another service line that architecture firms in the future will be incorporating into their work without a doubt. There's obviously a embodied carbon content discussion to have about reuse. We spend a lot of time wondering what materials have the lowest embodied carbon content, but we don't really ever take into consider the time of use of these materials. So it's almost better to use a material that has a longer lifespan, a higher ability to be reused over time, even if it does have a higher embodied carbon content, by offsetting the need to purchase new materials, even if they have a lower embodied carbon content. It really starts to sort of muddy the waters a bit on the discussions we've been having when you consider time as a variable when we're addressing embodied carbon. So again, the whole goal for me is I understand that architects and contractors, being neither of them myself, my job is to make your job easier by actually focusing on the supply chain so that you don't have to. And so the goal is really that I become a facilitator of industry-specific supply chain where architects and contractors are all linked in the same network, and we can actually, for the first time ever, take ownership of the supply chains that we're so reliant upon. And so coming up with these ideas that really stem from the circular economy has become my obsession, and I'd be more than happy to share some of these. And I always love feedback and having just amazing conversations. I wouldn't be having this conversation if I hadn't been having another one where Justin then brought me in to have this one. So thank you so much for your time and listening to what research and thoughts I have on the matter. Thank you.